Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. We'll go ahead and get started on our webinar today. Today, we are going to talk through the details of the recent Form I-9 process changes that I'm sure you've heard of and what that means for your company. So I am Sophie Dietrich, the HR professional for the Compliance Center here at Wagner, Felkner, and Judd. I'm sure you know us by now. We're that team dedicated to helping you navigate your human resource and employment law questions. So some quick housekeeping before we get started. Please send any questions you have to us via the chat option at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll have some Q&A time here to answer those questions. And also, so you are aware, the webinar is being recorded to share with those who can't attend with us right now. So with those items covered, let me introduce you to our presenter. Janell Stanton is here, and she is a senior associate with the employment law team here at Wagner, Felkner, and Judd. She brings 9 years of employment law and business litigation experience to the team, and she dedicates much of her practice to counseling business leaders on, compliance with the various federal, state, and local laws that we come across. So she's a great thought partner to have around, and we're very excited to have her here today. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And with that, I'll hand things over to Janell.
All right, great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Sophie. Excited to be back with you all today. We kind of feels like we took a little bit of a hiatus from all of the webinars that we did this summer to cover all of Minnesota's new law changes. So we're back today to talk about some big changes in the realm of the Form I-9. I don't anticipate that we'll go the full hour today. We also were able to get the webinar today approved for SHRM credits. So if anybody has a need for SHRM recertification credits, we are able to offer that for your attendance today. So just getting at the heart of the matter here, and going back to sort of basics, the Form I-9 has 3 essential components to it. The first one is completed at the time of hire. That's Section 1. And for those of you who may be newer to HR, or it might be a nice refresher, Section 1 of the form collects identifying information about the employee. It requires that the employee attest to whether they are a U.S. citizen, a non-citizen national, a lawful permanent resident, or a non-citizen authorized to work in the United States. So it asks them to attest to their status as somebody who's authorized to work in the U.S. Again, it's not really so much of a huge issue. Section 1's pretty straightforward. Most employees know how to fill it out. Section 2 is where we usually see our clients running into some trouble. Section 2 is actually the employer's responsibility. So this is not a section for your employee to be filling out, because there is a place there where the HR representative for the company, or the person that's actually reviewing the documents, attests to seeing those documents. And recall, this is the list A or the list B and C document that proves identity and authorization to work in the US. So Section 2 has to be completed within 3 days of the employee's hire. It collects, like I said, the employee's identity and employment authorization. The employee has to present original documentation that proves their identity and authorization, which the employer has to review. Section 3 is a re-verification section, and that's actually something that is changing, and we'll kind of get into a little bit of that later on here. Couple of other things I wanted to mention about the I-9, just kind of from a sort of housekeeping or reminder point of view. Employers have to maintain a person's Form I-9 for as long as the individual works for the employer and for the required retention period after the individual's employment ends. And that's either 3 years after the date of hire or 1 year after the date employment ended, whichever is later. And also I-9s are to be maintained in their own separate file. So whether that's a separate paper file, whether that's a separate electronically maintained file, they are required to be maintained separately. And employers are required to make I-9 forms available for inspection if the Department of Homeland Security, if the U.S. Department of Justice, or the U.S. Department of Labor comes in. You have to make those available for review. If you don't complete and retain these forms, there are civil money penalties, and in some egregious cases, you could also face criminal penalties. So very important that you're completing these I-9s, you're timely completing them, reviewing the documents in the right way. So obviously the reason we're here is because things got really shaken up. And for the longest time, pre-COVID, since I've been doing this anyway, employers were required to review I-9 documents in the physical presence of the employee. They were required to sit across from them and physically handle the Section 2 documents. So whether that's the passport, or that's a list A document, or if it's a driver's license and birth certificate for list B and C, you were required to physically handle those. And that included any remote hires. So if you're a Minnesota-based company, but you were hiring a remote employee in Wisconsin, the requirement was that you find somebody in Wisconsin who can physically be in front of your employee and look at those documents. For a lot of employers, this was really challenging to find somebody who was willing to take on that task. So sometimes companies were using notaries, or also in some cases relying on the employee's family members to fill out Section 2, which is kind of a hairy proposition, but not impermissible by any means. And so there was, that physical presence requirement. Well, enter COVID, and obviously we were all, at home, or many of us were at home anyway. And due to the pandemic, companies that were operating remotely were given what was called COVID-19 I-9 flexibility. So they could review Section 2 documents remotely by video, fax, email, or some other type of method. So if employers had employees that were taking physical proximity precautions, you could, again, look at those documents remotely within 3 business days. And if you were taking advantage of this, you were able to enter COVID-19 as the reason for this physical inspection delay in the Section 2 additional information field once physical inspection was to take place after normal operations resumed. And there was, again, some technical guidance as far as how to document that properly on the I-9 timeframes to accomplish it within. So just obviously be aware that this has now ended. And this ended, the COVID-19 temporary flexibilities, that ended back on July 31st. And any employees whose documents were inspected remotely during that time frame, employers had to have completed the in-person physical document inspection by August 30th. I know some clients have reached out and not completed that in-person physical document inspection yet. So that is a deadline that has now passed. So technically you've missed the boat on that, but I think obviously still, if you're now just hearing of this from me, certainly take the time now to complete that in-person physical document inspection. Or if you are a company that wants to continue remote inspections, USCIS, which is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the federal agency that promulgates most of these rules, they came out with what they're calling an alternative procedure for companies to still do remote examination of Section 2 documents. It requires E-Verify though. So it's not just get on a Zoom and verify documents. USCIS has kind of thrown a little bit of a wrench into this. So if you are an employer who's already enrolled in E-Verify because you're in a state that requires it, or because you're a state or federal government contractor, you're already good to go. So less heartburn there. But if you're not already, you would need to enroll in E-Verify, and you need to remotely examine your employees' I-9 documents, and it has to be done via live video. So if you recall, I just said during that I-9 remote flexibility time, you were actually able to review over video link, fax, or email. That is no longer the case. So you will need to set up a Zoom, a Teams meeting, uh, whatever other Skype. I don't know if people are still using that, but you have to set up some kind of remote video option to look at that person's actual documents, even if you're not going to physically handle them. So then you need to, oops, my apologies. So you need to select the Form I-9 to use, and you need to annotate it, and we'll talk about this. If you're using the new Form I-9, and that it might be a whole new surprise for all of you, but we'll talk about that too. If you're using the new Form I-9, they've added a check box for alternative procedures. So if you are going to be using this new alternative procedure to review, there's a new checkbox on the form. If you're using the old form, which you can continue to use here for a period of time, you would write alternative procedure in the additional information field to note that you did that remote verification. Then you need to retain all document copies with the I-9. So you have to retain all copies of I-9 documents that you examine remotely. So an employee will need to scan an email or somehow run a photocopy and send you a copy. You have to retain those document copies. And then you need to create a case in E-Verify. So this is the new alternative process if your company wants to continue remote inspections. You certainly are not required to do this. And, you know, a lot of companies who don't have to already participate in E-Verify may not want to go down this road. And we'll kind of talk about some pros and cons of E-Verify in just a couple of minutes here. But, you know, this is a way to I think USCIS realizes that we have much more of a remote workforce now than we had before. And it's just sort of commensurate with the environment we find ourselves in, that employees are more and more working still remotely. So you can, if you are, you know, new to this, everify.org has some helpful webinars, FAQs, tutorials so that you can learn how to use the E-Verify system. You have to basically have users manage and create cases. The trainings are free. They're part of the whole enrollment process. So if you're signing your company up for it, you can, you know, get the training right then and there. There's also like fraud awareness and anti-discrimination training, which can be helpful. You know, obviously, you're never still required to be an expert on these documents, but the training is meant to help you sort of figure out or discover whether somebody is using presenting a fraudulent ID or a fraudulent social security card number. I've definitely been there. I've helped clients go back and look at like what social security cards looked like in the 80s, to see if it's a legitimate social security card. So, you're still not required to be an expert, but that fraud awareness is a nice component of the training. All right. So there's some definite pros and cons to consider. Obviously, top of mind here, it allows you to continue remote verification of Section 2 documents. So if COVID forced your company to be much more of a nationwide company and you're hiring lots of remote workers, this could be a major pro, because if you don't do E-Verify, like I said, you've got to go back to the old process where you were having somebody who was physically located in that state look at those documents. Like I said, some state and federal contractors are already required to use E-Verify. So if you are either voluntarily using it or using it because some state laws required it, you're already adjusted to it. You're already used to using it. So it's really sort of a kind of a no-brainer. It can also help your company avoid receiving Social Security no match letters. And the results can be immediate. So once you're up and running and you're kind of knowing how to do it, it gets to be smooth sailing once you get there. But there's some definite cons as well. If you decide to go this road and you sign up for E-Verify, the Social Security Administration, that's SSA, and the Department of Homeland Security are now allowed to audit your data. So the E-Verify's monitoring and compliance unit reviews data every 30 days to determine if normal statistical parameters are being met. And if E-Verify in that sort of audit process spots issues, they'll notify the appropriate government agency that will then conduct an audit. And if you spend any time talking about employment law with me, or if you're a client of mine, I'm pretty much always like, we don't want government agencies in our business. Usually that doesn't end well for most companies to be subject to these types of audits. There's a lot of really nitpicky requirements with the Form I-9. So welcoming them in to your business to look at your data, again, can cause a lot of heartburn for a lot of companies. And ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, has confirmed that E-Verify use has no bearing on an I-9 audit and won't impact the outcome. So just because you use E-Verify, that doesn't decrease the chance of being audited. It also will not decrease the chance of an I-9 audit fine. So if you find yourself amidst an ICE raid or Department of Homeland Security or somebody else coming in, don't expect that your fine would be reduced simply by using E-Verify. There can also be some erroneous non-confirmations of work authorization, which just really mucks up the works. There's also, usually you need to have more than one staff member in the company trained up on it, because somebody's out sick or somebody leaves. You want to have a few people trained up on it. And then sometimes, look, there's just good old-fashioned software issues where E-Verify has had maintenance issues. Sometimes it's been offline. Timeliness of submissions can then be affected. Also, if the government is shut down, which unfortunately with the status of our federal government can happen, it can be shut down for periods of time. And then once the database is back open, there's usually not a very long period of time where users can submit that data that they would have submitted while E-Verify was shut down. So some things to think about if you are debating whether you want to take advantage of this new flexibility. All right, so turning to the new Form I-9. So USCIS has announced a new version of the Form I-9. Employers may begin using it August 1st, so you can be using it now, but you are required to begin using it on or after November 1st. So they gave a little leeway for companies to sort of start looking at and working with that new document. And to make sure you have the right one, the new Form I-9 is dated 8/1/2023. You can find that date right in the lower left-hand corner of the form. So just make sure you, after November 1st, which is really coming up fast on us, that you have are switching over to that new form. All right, so the changes. A lot of these changes are, I would say, are unlikely to throw your company into big stitches, right? Like this is not a huge change, but there's some things to note. Sections 1 and 2 are reduced now to a single sheet. They just merge some fields into fewer fields, so that employer certification section, for example, is just more fields. So they got it all into a single sheet versus two. That section 1 prepare translator certification area, this is where if an employee uses the assistance of a translator or somebody to help them fill out the Form I-9, that used to be part of section 1. That's now moved to a separate supplement A that employers can use when it's necessary. There's 3 areas for current and future preparers and translators to complete as needed. You can attach additional supplements as needed. So, you might be thinking, why in the world would I keep doing that? Well, if you have an employee that's got a work authorization that gets re-verified, over the course of many years, you might have multiple times them using a translator or preparer to assist them with that re-verification process. Remember, I was talking about that section 3. So section 3, the re-verification and rehire, that's being moved to its own standalone supplement B. So you may have lots and lots of employees that you never use supplement B for. And I think a lot of employers weren't really using section 3 as often. And so now it's just moved to supplement B. So if you have a rehire or you need to re-verify work authorization, that is now done on supplement B. And again, you can attach additional supplement Bs as it's needed. A few more changes here. They removed the use of the term alien authorized to work in section 1. And now now the term is non-citizen authorized to work. They also clarified the difference between non-citizen national and non-citizen authorized to work. I think, with the old form, there was some maybe confusion about, those different statuses. So that's been changed. They've also now ensured that the form can be filled out on tablets and other mobile devices. So you can download it onto a device and open a free Adobe app and complete it that way, which is really nice. Very rarely do people have printers anymore to print things out and fill them out. So kind of nice, they made it more mobile friendly. They've also removed features that make the form able to be downloaded easily. It also removes the requirement to enter NA in certain fields, because if you recall, you had to enter NA in fields that were not applicable. So that requirement is removed. They gave better guidance on that list of acceptable documents, especially as it relates to receipts. The old guidance on the list of acceptable documents, especially as it relates to receipts, was very confusing. And there's also, for any of you who have employees that have work authorization or EADs, employment authorization documents, where there's automatic extensions, you know, you're probably familiar with this sort of headache of trying to figure out, like, is it 540 days, or how many days is the extension for, and what qualifies and all that. So there's better guidance there. It's still not perfect. You still need to probably either reach out to an attorney for assistance or get into more research on the USCIS website, but it is helpful. I did take a look at it. There's a little more information there. And then, of course, it added that checkbox for E-Verify employers to indicate that they remotely examined Form I-9 documents. There's also some new I-9 instructions as well. They reduced the length of the instructions on I-9 from 15 to 8 pages. Thank you, federal government, for that. So not quite a lengthy set of instructions. They've added some definition of key actors in the process, streamline the steps that everybody has to take to complete their section. They also added some instructions about that alternative procedure, so for remote examination of I-9 documents. And then they've removed some abbreviations, charts, and modified that M274 handbook. Again, if you are new to this, obviously we're not doing a really deep dive into all things I-9 related with this webinar. That M274 handbook is almost always what I start my research with, because it is actually a very fabulous resource. It's very, very long, but it has a table of contents, and you can hop to the section that you need to be researching. But it is common that you will see documents, you have no idea what it is, and may not know, like, let's say you do an audit of your existing I-9s, which I highly recommend, and you see errors. There are very specific ways that you need to notate those changes, and whether you can go back to employees to ask for additional information. It'll tell you whether you can do that, how to do it, how to note things, and how, if you need to attach new sheets. So that M274 handbook is actually very, very helpful and provides lots of guidance to employers for that Form I-9. Well, I wasn't wrong. It's not an hour-long presentation today, but I do have a couple questions here. Let me just kind of take a look. Are you legally required to E-Verify? So generally, most employers are not legally required to use E-Verify. Some states do require it. And if you are a state or federal government contractor, you might be required to use it. But there's no general legal requirement that every employer use E-Verify. When do you have to recertify? That's a great question. So it just depends. If you have, for example, some work authorization documents have expiration dates. And so your employee may need to get a new document. They may come to you with a receipt for a new document. So that re-verification happens when they're in a status where their authorization expires. and this is not a driver's license expiration or passport expiration. You don't have to, those are not documents that you need to recertify. I'm talking more like, an employee authorization document or thing like that. So a couple of good questions. If anybody else has questions, go ahead and throw them either into the Q&A section or the chat. But certainly, you can also, if you are signed up for our service, or you have more questions, you can reach out to Chris Kelly at HR. He can talk to you more about getting access to our attorneys, or Sophie, our wonderful HR professional. We can help guide you through these issues as they're coming up. I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, here's one. In the event of an audit, how will the Minnesota driver's licenses that state not for federal ID impact the I-9? That's a great question. And I don't know off the top of my head. I think that, again, if you're using your driver's license to prove identity, there are other types of ID cards that you might not be able to use to drive with, but can be sufficient to prove identity. So I can't answer that question live, but certainly if you're a client, feel free to reach out with that question. It's a good one. I just don't have the list A and list B and C appropriate documents in front of me to specifically answer that one.
Hey, Janelle, this is Sophie. I can
Yeah.
give an example there. Another example for a driver's license in that section would be like a student ID with a picture on it, right? So that
Oh,
student
yeah.
ID is not okay for driving, but it still proves their identity. So where you want to watch out for that not used for federal ID is on a social security card, because some of those cards will say not for employment authorization. That's what you want to look out for. Those driver's licenses that say not for federal ID does not impact the I-9 as far as the identity.
Yeah, perfect. All right. We do have another question here, but again, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Like I said, when I receive these questions, I don't know if you have to make a new case in E-Verify. I'd have to research that separately, but I would assume in E-Verify you probably do need to rerun a new case, but again, I'm not sure. Maybe Sophie knows.
It's been a few years since I did I-9s myself, so it's not on the top of my head either. So you kind of
Okay.
stumped me on that one too, but good question.
Yeah.
Kathleen, if you want to email that over to us, we can definitely research and get
Yes,
back to you.
absolutely. All right. Well, a couple of good questions. And just want to, I think we'll close it out here, but thank you to everybody for attending. And again, if you want to reach out to us or you want to get access to this service, please feel free to reach out to Chris. His information is here. And we do have a whole new fall series coming up. So there will be 3 more webinars as part of our fall series. So watch out for the invitations to those. And just a big thank you to everybody for attending, and have a great day.